Put on this computer. Can I get someone to help me take notes? George, thank you.
George. Yep. So we have a shared doc. Okay. All right, I'm going to hit mute so I can keep Paris up to speed, but not mutter through your meeting.
Okay. So let's start with, as in previous weeks, why don't we review the 1.8 goals? Why are there attendees? There's two sections. Looks like it's repeated twice. Okay. I'm going to copy the one thing that's...
Something to be tidied up. It's all good.
Yeah, I'll take care of that.
Okay, my bad.
No worries.
Yep.
Why don't we start by reviewing the 1.8 goals that we have for the quarter? So new metrics surrounding contributor experience and project velocity. Caleb, I think you took it as a note to kind of work on some of the brainstorming for that. Is Caleb here? No. All right.
Yeah, I am here. I unfortunately have not yet had cycles.
Okay. I'll put you in touch so I can give kind of an update on what's going on with this. I've talked with Dan Cohn from the CNCF a few times, and I think we want to still go through kind of an evaluation period with Sappho. We're not sure if that's 100% the right tool. So if you guys don't recall, there's a tool called Sappho that's used for some of the visualizations that we have. And whether that's the right solution for what we're looking for or Velodrome was a question that we're looking to get answered. So for a few months, CNCF is going to fund both. And so there's a contributor who has worked on a few other things for us. His name is Lucas, something I can't pronounce. And I can link to his PRs. And he's working on extending Velodrome to see if he can get some of the metrics that we're looking for. And he's also working on using the GitHub archive to do it. And then meanwhile, at the same time, in parallel, Sappho's working on doing some of the similar efforts, and we're going to compare and I think make a decision in a few months. So I'll follow up with Dan on that. We do need to define the metrics though. So that's really on us, is to define the what. Both tools are there to help us actually implement them. So we can have help with that, but I think Caleb, and it looks like to some extent Aaron, has the contributor ladder metrics. Have you gotten a chance to talk to the steering committee at all, Aaron, if Aaron's on there? Okay, I'll follow with him offline.
Yeah, I didn't see Aaron today.
And Sadev added some additional ones as well. So I guess I'll link the three of you and make sure you guys are all in contact with Lucas and the folks from Sappho so that we can start defining what specifically we'd like. We need to give them a clear message of what we want, though.
Okay. From my experience in 1.7, when I was kind of excited that we're going to have a reporting tool around test flakes because I've been a pain point in 1.6, Sappho kind of, I don't know if it was that useful. Like it was kind of buggy and not reliable, so I ended up just having to do stuff manually. And I don't know if it's changed since then, but my experience thus far hasn't been great.
Okay. If you could write down feedback when you have it or shoot it to the Contrivex list maybe, that would probably be pretty helpful so that we can take it back to them and either get it fixed or use that later on when we're defining our feedback and reasons for making one decision or another.
Okay. I mean, it might have just been that when it needed to be working reliably because I needed to depend on it, it just wasn't there. And so it's like alpha and I needed to be stable or something like that. I'm not saying they couldn't get to a good point and maybe, having a longer period to shake out issues would be worthwhile. But yeah, I'll provide that feedback.
Specifically around test flakes or just in general when we were looking at issues per SIG and those kinds of things as well? Were there issues?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really using it for test flakes in 1.7. It was more like trying to reduce the number of open issues and having a reporting mechanism to indicate like where issues were, and like the summary stats they were providing were just inaccurate. I would go change things and there would be a huge lag in some cases issues would never update. So it was like, not useful. Anyway.
Okay, so we need faster updates too.
Yeah, it needs to be, if there's going to be a lag, that lag needs to be sort of indicated. And I didn't know what the lag was, and they said, it should be like, within 5 to 10 minutes, and it wasn't updating within days. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's hugely problematic. All right. Okay, good to know. Let's move forward to the next one. The next thing that we were looking at was providing a consistent experience across repos. So the standard subset of labels seems to be stuck. I am going to just sit down. It's the same guy who's working on Velodrome. The PR, I think, is done. It needs a final review. He's tested it, and it worked. The only thing that I'm going to say is when we roll this out, this is going to be something we're going to roll out to a couple repositories. I was thinking community and test infra, since we're kind of involved in those repos, and I can work on turning it off or rolling back without too much pain, as opposed to doing it across 40 repos all at once. And as a reminder, this is getting a consistent subset of labels available across all repos. And it's not going to be all the labels, but we're going to start with like the SIG labels and the kind labels, I think, and maybe the priority labels. So it should be 20 or so labels that seem like they should be important across every Kubernetes project. The PR is in a good state. Like I said, it has worked before. We just need a final review in LGTM. And I think Spixter, Joe Finney from Test Infra said he didn't have any additional bandwidth to review. So I'll try and get on that. Or if anyone else has some bandwidth to review that PR, that'd be awesome. It's linked.
And you mentioned community repo. What other repo? Sorry, I missed that. To enable
Test Infra, perhaps. That's where the tool itself is going to live. So sort of makes sense for it to dog food on itself.
And the PR is in the under community repo, right? Correct?
No, the PR itself is in the test infrastructure repo.
It's under test. Okay, I'll take a look here.
Okay, it's linked. If you look at our contributor experience 1.8 planning doc, which is where I am right now, it's linked there.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see. Cool. Thanks. Yep.
The next one is mostly Aaron, so I'll talk to him after. It's about discoverability of policies. So that's PR mechanisms, or not so much automation, but definitely org-wide policies. So it's defining labels, updating the merge requirements, owners files, how owners are used.
He did do owners.
Yeah, I think I saw the
great.
owners one. I saw pull request.md get updated. So
Yeah.
we're kind of on the way there. Okay, so the user support rotation, it looks like George wanted to talk about this anyway, right? So do you want to give an update?
Yeah, so I was on holiday last week, so I wasn't able to really work on that other than executing the live office hours, but it's the same kind of structure there. So I'm planning on getting to the actual live user rotation and more of a offline office hour. So right now I'm calling office hours like the live stream and then the, hey, let's organize people in Kubernetes-users. So I'm going to split that to be two obviously separate things. But I just did a live stream this morning and we learned a bunch. I've got a ton of notes. I'll put the links in on what we need to do to make that better. We had about 50 people show up, so that was pretty cool. Plenty of support from the developer side, so I felt that it was a value and we should definitely run it every 2 weeks. So over the next, between now and our next Contribix meeting, I plan on starting the actual user support rotation and the Slack-focused office hours, I guess. Whatever we want to call, I don't know if we should call it that or whatever.
Okay, we've got some new people on the call. Do you want to define the two things just briefly real quick?
Sure. So there's this document on the GitHub community section called user support rotation. And I guess what that is it was like a little chart of when people would be responsible for monitoring Stack Overflow questions and the Slack channel and whatnot. And I guess that came from like an internal Google document from back in the day. I don't know. I guess people were assigned. So the idea is like, hey, can we expand that to be more community focused so that people can just say, hey, I'm available for 1 hour a week, but what do I do, right? So things like where to look for questions, how to do proper support, here are reusable templates you can use, here's the links to the docs, how you link to the right things correctly, what SIGs to send people depending on the problem. So gathering all of that and kind of giving a volunteer like all the resources they need in order to successfully do a rotation. And part of that involves like the Slack channel and things like that. Office hours, which I did this morning, I thought was going to be a really easy thing to do, where we would just get on a YouTube live stream and live answer user questions for an hour. So that's kind of more. I'm sorry, someone was going to say something?
I was going to ask how it went, and did you have enough questions?
So everything went exactly how I wanted it to go, except for the first 7 minutes where I didn't know this, but when you create an event in YouTube, it creates a different API key for your streaming software to go to. So when I started streaming to where like the community meeting streams to, instead of this other newly generated thing. So we had a whole bunch of people mobilize and go to that, and then to tell people to come to the right thing. And then, so the first 10 minutes were rough, but once we got going, it felt really good. People were asking the right questions. We were able to determine, because some questions are like, hey man, I can't access agent to your stuff. Check IP table. Like, but so people started to ask kind of more generic, hey, what's that sort of thing. So we were able to kind of steer it in the right direction. So Ilya and I are definitely going to do another one in 2 weeks. So we got just the right amount of feedback we needed. All the feedback we got is something we can fix. So, checking people's microphones ahead of time, silly things like that we just had to codify. So that's something, so that's separate from the user support rotation. And I signed up to do both things for 1.8. So I kicked off that one, and then I'm getting on the user support rotation bit next. Sorry, that took way too long. Any questions?
All right. Then the last thing that we have for our goal was to support the release team. And Maro, you might be familiar with this as well. This came from Don from 1.7. It was has to do with that approved for milestone label, and the whole policy around automatically generating release notes that are organized by SIG, by component, by issue, and then finally by PR. So there's some kind of hierarchy, and there's not 400 plus. Caleb, I don't know how many hours you said went into it last time, 30, 40 engineering hours, maybe more.
Yeah, it's like 30.
30 hours of just deduping and organizing release notes. So there's some work being done there. Specifically, there are 2 new employees that joined the Google Kubernetes, the effort from Google on Kubernetes, and they're going to be focused on that for the first few weeks, at least. So there are people working on it, and you'll probably see some PRs going in there in the kind of release infrastructure area, working with the tool that currently automatically generates the release notes, and they're going to try and follow Don's proposal. The other thing that we need to work on is the approved for milestone label. So that was part of Don's proposal as well, is having SIGs accept issues as approved for milestones, so that we have a really clear signal of how healthy the milestone is, or how healthy the release is. And currently, only people with write access can add that label, so we need to get some work done. We need some automation that allows people to add approved for milestone, and it needs to be tied to SIG leads. And as far as I know, there are no label adding privileges associated with SIG leads right now. So how we do that is going to be something we have to define. I had an idea for it, which I talked to Mauro about, using the owner's alias file and having a SIG leads, but Prow does not read the owner's alias. So there's some, if anyone wants to dive into that and get involved with the automation work, I can set aside some time and talk to you about the work that needs to be done. I don't really have time to do it myself, but it's something that would be very helpful.
I mean, I don't know. Sorry?
I think I'm interested in doing that just because it ties into the work around the Mungebot and maintaining issues in the milestone. So I'm happy to talk with you offline about implementing that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mario.
Yeah, I'd also love to learn more about it. Is there any reason why we wouldn't expand the list of people who could apply the label to the approvers for SIG rather than just the SIG leads? since I guess, I don't think we're generally operating under the assumption that SIG leadership is like a TL role, more of like a believer, we're like reaching consensus on that it's a facilitation kind of role.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the idea was that the SIG leads or their delegate. So I said SIG leads there, but the SIG leads would probably know who the TL is and who could.
Yeah, we don't want to conflate SIG lead with TL. We want to be sure that SIG leads are may be a TL, but may not be.
I think there just needs to be some restriction on who can add that label, because especially during code/code freeze, there's lots of cases where someone who's in a SIG and is an approver is adding approve to milestone because they think it's important, but there's no oversight, there's no communication, and that really slows down getting a release stable. So
generating that audited, curated list is going to be something difficult to do then. We can start with the SIG leads and ask them to add to it, but in my experience, because it's the equivalent of getting an owner's file updated, it's really hard to do.
Well, I mean, I think it should be easier than the owner's file, because we're not talking specifically about code ownership. We're just saying within a SIG, who has responsibility for having oversight over things that are like in a milestone. And I think that can be a small subset of people. It doesn't have to be just the SIG leads. But the idea is just people who know that when you're adding something to the milestone, especially during code slush or code freeze, you have to communicate that. You can't just, this is my pet issue, I need to get it in. It's like, okay, I need this in, I'm going to talk to the right people and make sure that everybody's on board with it, rather than just unilaterally deciding that, because that really makes things difficult for everybody.
Okay, so maybe I'll take it as an action item for myself, or George, can you write this down? To get the first pass PR done that adds that owner's alias, like a SIG leads owner's alias, and I'll just auto-generate it from the sigs.yaml file in community. And then we can show that PR tomorrow. Sarah, or whoever's leading the community meeting, if any of you are there, Jace, maybe we can do this during the release update section. Just mention that this is something we'd like to do. And we can link to the PR and ask SIG leads to update with people that they think should be able to add that label. So we get kind of a curated list, and we'll start with SIG leads.
And I mean, to be honest, it could be everybody in a SIG. The goal is just making sure that there's a bar for addition, like that you have responsibilities in return for getting this privilege. That's all.
Right, and also a clear metric or a clear discussion that when you add this label, it means you also do these things, to your point about, informing people and such. So I won't actually be in the community meeting on Thursday, so Jason George will be leading the charge there. Okay,
so we'll take some time and just mention that.
Yeah, and then just PM me the PR, and I'll make sure it gets added to the agenda for the update for the release.
Okay.
And just for my edification, what is the proper life cycle around the approved for milestone label? I mean, what is the actual use case intended? Because I have an idea, but I want to make sure that my assumptions are right.
You're probably the best one to talk about specifics. I was assuming it was just during code freeze, code slush, to sort of make sure that when issues are added to the milestone, we sort of have an indication of whether a SIG has had a chance to review and indicate that this indeed should be in the milestone. But I mean, some of the notes here suggest that maybe it should be doing the entire development cycle.
I think we should start with the former, which is enforce this during code freeze and kind of see where it goes from there. We're defining what it's used for, Jace, to answer your question. And what I think we've agreed on, or what I've heard spoken the most, is that during burn down, it's difficult to get a signal of how healthy the release is going to be. And having SIG leads clearly say, I own this, will help us do that. So just during burn down for now.
So if we after September 1st, essentially we would go through all the open issues, and either SIGs would add this label, and if they don't, then basically all the issues get kicked out of the milestone.
Boom, you're out.
With a caveat, as Phil's proposed, issues that are priority, critical, urgent, which indicate a blocker, are not moved out.
Yeah.
My intent is that we can tie in approve to milestone to the milestone maintaining munger such that it'll automatically just nag people and it'll automatically kick stuff that isn't a blocker out, so that the release team isn't doing that sort of manual tedium.
So would it make sense to tie this into the automation around that? Because then it's an easy win.
I think so, yeah.
Thanks for educating me on this.
Okay, so that's updates for the 1.8 stuff. Things that have come up just over the last week that I scribbled down, or other people have scribbled down. The contribution workshop. George, did you talk about that already, or is that from last week?
No, I wasn't here last week. I reached out to the person who did this at the Golang event, and I was like, "Hey, do you mind if we totally rip off this idea?" And he was like, "Absolutely. Let me know what you need." So I'm going to reach out to him as far as getting that leaderboard that he had set up. If you follow the link, it has a link to how they set it up. The only issue I have is what I submitted to KubeCon sounds relatively boring compared to this. So I need to figure out a way to go back to my submission and say, actually, we're going to make it look like this, which is going to be fun.
I bet Chris can help you on that.
Okay.
And I presume it was Steve Francia that you reached out to?
Yeah, SPF 13. I believe.
Yep. He is part of our team, so he will happily help you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
Okay, PR's waiting for test. Did someone, who added that? Looks like there are 55 PRs that needs the okay to test label, which, I don't know, less than 10%. I kind of like the enforcing that in general. I'm not sure what the suggestion was, if we need a policy around triaging needs okay to test and actually actively writing that. But for now, I think we need to have something to protect our infrastructure.
What was the context here?
I don't know. It's got the needs okay to test label, so I clicked it and it says, looks like there are 55 PRs that have needs okay to test. Was there an email that got sent out to the mailing list or something like that?
Somebody was talking about this in the channel. Who was that?
Aaron, this feels like a very Aaron thing.
It was either Aaron or, oh man, who was it? I'll find out.
Okay.
But I think that, I mean, the bottom line is that this may be in an unreasonable place to stall out some of these PRs. I think that was the concern, which, that's debatable.
I mean, hopefully that can be something that's reported on and we can shame SIGs into addressing that and making sure that, we actually have SIG labels, which I think we already have a munger for that, right?
Yeah. And definitely there should be some, if you are at a corporation, you should definitely be looking for, PRs for people who work with you to trigger the CI for them.
Yep. Okay, so this was the big one. I don't know if anyone's followed the thread on Kubernetes dev, but there's some concern about the approvers and reviewers mechanism. A while ago, the policy changed from using the owners files reviewers for LGTM to anyone in the org can LGTM. And this was sort of a byproduct of a couple PRs that went in pretty quickly. And the goal, I think, was to improve project velocity. And we never really discussed it too much. So there's a few things that have happened in response. This started, by the way, in response to a thread from Steve Kuznetsov, I think, at Red Hat on implicit self-approval. And the idea is anyone in the org can write LGTM, and if an author is in an owner's file and they implicitly approve, their PR is getting in, even if it's kind of a work in progress. So a few things happen. One, we've got work in progress. We have a PR out that implements a work in progress checker. Maru, were you working on that?
No, that's all Steve.
That's Steve. Okay. And the idea is it won't merge PRs that have work in progress in the title. But the other thing that came out of that was, like I said, should we revert back to the old policy where reviewers actually, it meant something more than, right now reviewers are solely being used for assigning PRs out for review. So if a new PR is created and it's unassigned, the blunderbuss munger in Munge GitHub looks at reviewers, looks at all the owners' files, and it assigns weights to various owners based on something. It might be the number of lines that they've modified, I think, and it selects someone's based on that weighting to review the PR. It selects 2 people actually to review. But as of now, anyone in the org has the ability to add the LGTM label, which is one step in the gating of getting code merged.
What is, I've never really understood this. I mean, in my mind, you have code owners, and any code going into the tree should have at least one person looking at it just to make sure that, it's not completely crazy. We're all human, right?
Right.
But I mean, why is there a difference between approve and LGTM?
Sure, that's a good question. This is the first project that I worked on. So the idea is that as we grow the project, we want to grow leadership, and we want 2 kinds of, we want people that are really familiar with the code to obviously be looking at just about everything before it goes in. But as the project grows, they're not going to have the ability to give everything thorough review, which is like making sure that everything matches the style guidelines, making sure that the code's well tested. So LGTM should be coming from someone who's done a thorough review of the code. Approval is more of a high level, this code is in the right place, it belongs in this directory. So approvers is on a per directory basis, or down a subtree, and it should reflect like the general idea that this belongs in the project, in this repository, and it makes sense. So it's more like a high level stamp of approval. And people in the approvers file have generally been on the project for a very long time, have committed a lot of code or a lot of the design at the very least, and are very familiar. So they're the stamp of approval, whereas the other one's more like a long, thorough review. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Just is also more about cross-project. It like, does this fit with the bigger picture, as opposed to necessarily a straight up, I did a code review and this looks sane.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm used to Garrett.
This is Garrett's +2.
Yeah. So you have, approver is a +2, and a +1 is basically, it could be just a new reviewer who's indicating that they think it's good. I mean, it's a way of sort of building your reputation that you're actually reviewing, or it could be a subject matter expert who doesn't have approval rights, but is still like, for a given specialty thing, you need this person to review. And if they give a +1, that's essentially like they're approving. So the LGTM, I mean, it makes sense that you have, approve an LGTM, but like, I'm not sure that it's clear. Like, I think there's a process of education because the tooling doesn't really make it explicit what's going on, which I think is problematic.
So that was part of Aaron's quick. Go ahead, Sadaf.
Oh, just my feedback on that. On Garrett +2 and +1, I think that's pretty simple. +2 is, I think, LGTM plus approval, right? So you can have your workflow. If you can do +2, you can basically merge it. You can approve it.
But Garrett, well, I mean, there's actually +2, +1, and then there's approval. So it's like actually ternary. There's 3 things.
But the guy with +2 can actually approve as well, right? I mean, workflow, you can always do.
Just that it's a separate thing. You can +2 without approving.
Exactly, right.
You can also -2 and -1. So there's more signal, and GitHub, it's kind of like you can say, I want changes, which is the equivalent of like a -1, -2 thing. And you can approve, but you have to do that through comments. And so it's just this bifurcated indication of what state a PR is in, which I think is problematic. I don't know how to fix that, to be honest, but I'm just pointing out the obvious.
Maru, can you reiterate the problem one more time? Sorry, you know how to fix what?
So I mean, indicating that there's a problem with the PR that needs to be remedied or like code changes that are required, that's a function of GitHub review. And so you'll see like, needs changes, whatever indicated in the UI. And then if you're giving an LGTM or approval, that's like, comments and labels. And so there's this kind of like approval uses this mechanism, like changes use this mechanism. And
yeah, it's like a disconnect from the workflow, right? Do I toggle GitHub or do I leave a special comment? And then what state is the
This
PR?
is something we need to come back to and make this consistent. But when we implemented this effort,
oh yeah, no, I understand.
And approvers didn't exist on GitHub, and I don't think there was the concept of requested changes. You could leave comments in the code, but there wasn't like a very clear flag that said like Maru requests changes. So now that's why there's the labels and the the automation that exists as well.
So I mean, there's a section below GitHub concerns and suggestions, and I guess I would hope that we could, given that we're the biggest GitHub project by far, that we could hopefully provide feedback and drive change in their UI so that we don't have to maintain special purpose stuff on our side, if possible. I don't know, it may not make sense because like the approvers mechanism, like owners and all that, that's not really GitHub.
No, because they don't have the concept of that per directory, and owners files like.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking that like what we could talk to them about doing is providing like a consistent state machine we could drive with an API. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be in response to, I requested, changes, but it could be like, okay, my bot says that this person has approval rights, so go change that state machine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
I think it's worth us re-engaging with GitHub. And I think somebody took that as an action item because we tried a year and a half ago and didn't get very far with our requested changes. But I think in the same way that we are suddenly getting a pile more attention everywhere, we might get a pile more attention at GitHub too.
Yeah, and actually maybe 6 months ago, I sat down with the head of product at GitHub and gave a list of problems that we've had to them. And we had a PM reach out again, which I guess we'll get to there later, but they want more feedback about our concerns.
And Caleb, have you seen the long-standing list that we've had, some of which are fixed, some of which we've worked around, et cetera?
Nope, I've not seen the long-standing list.
Okay, we have a long-standing list. I will go find that for you.
Yeah, can you link it in the meeting notes, sir?
I will go find it for you.
Thank you.
Or at least I will go find the email which has the summary of things that have been fixed and not, because I don't know if the doc does.
So maybe there's a chance in heck that we could actually have better code review, because I have to say GitHub really doesn't measure up if you're doing serious code review.
We have heard that again and again.
I don't know. I hear this is a pretty large open source project that makes do with just email patch submissions.
Yeah.
I don't know that we want to go that path.
I'm just saying that there's been success using far more rudimentary tools than we currently have.
But in some ways, that's a better tool than GitHub because you kind of have an expectation that it's like that's the low bar. GitHub is kind of this mishmash of like high level and low level, and
you can do it.
I think is the problem.
You can do what I do and just add .patch to all the PR URLs. I'm retro over here.
All right. Is there anything else we wanted to address? All right. Well, in that case, thanks, everyone. I'll give you guys 19 minutes back.
See ya.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.